This book had a bit of a long genesis. It started in the beginning of 2016 with a symposium in Utrecht on postcolonial intellectuals in Europe, and then after 2 years and a half, this summer, we came out with this co-edited book. It was also, I mean, the process took so long because we had to deal with 3 very contested, very discussed concepts which appear in the title. So one of the drives behind the book was to counter a bit, or to challenge the discourse of the decline of the intellectual. So Sandra and I were wondering which intellectuals are declining and which intellectuals are emerging on the rise, and in what contexts. So our book, Postcolonial Intellectuals in Europe, Critics, Artists, Movement and Their Publics, here, wants to build up an argument in favor of the increasing success of intellectuals in today's society, and particularly of postcolonial intellectuals.
So we wanted to think of this idea of the intellectual not as a unique figure. There is this idea that intellectuals are waning, are dying, are expiring. People like Said are dead. If Chomsky died, what we got left? This is here the huge charisma and the huge attention in the public sphere is like retreating. Now we have many talking heads, but no one with this kind of appeal and reach. But I wanted to rethink this idea that it's a collaborative label, that this intellectual production is never unique, it's never singular, it's never individual, but it's part of larger movement, larger coalition, larger connection that we wanted to explore. So think not of the figure in itself and the biographical element, but also the network that they produce, the apparatuses they move in. So I need to think also the kind of industry they produce and produce them.
And reading the interventions of Movement X, I wanted to explore what is the connection between the resurgence of equality as a political discourse and the strategies of a movement which in its title already implies movement for what, of whom, right? But Movement X. That the X brings up associations, Malcolm X, the American Civil Rights Movement, but it also brings up a question of anonymity. I mean, that anonymous. How does the activities of this movement and its connection to a discourse of equality produce another post-colonial Europe? So historically, one could say, as Sandra mentioned already, that both geographically and historically, the colonies have been intrinsic to Europe, right? To the constitution of Europe. So that doesn't need much discussion. So I will take that as given.
But I think still the idea struck with me of trying to look at what happens at the intersections of intellectual labor activist work from a post-colonial angle and from more situated examples. So the 2 examples that I discuss in the chapter are a small, what you would call a small data activist intervention, Bana Alabed, who started tweeting from Eastern Aleppo in 2016 and over time became really recognized as a sort of poster child of digital activism in Syria, and who has over time also then been airlifted to Turkey, been personally recognized also for her activities by President Erdogan. Which raises all sorts of questions which I try to touch upon in the chapter. And secondly, an example of big data and how big data can be mobilized also as a way to make human rights claims, very much against the grain. So I think for both instances we should recognize that the internet and this infrastructure really emerged from a colonial and military industrial complex, which is still very visible in the ways in which it's currently, for example, deployed at the borders of Europe. So, for example, migrant flows are predicted.
Because I really respect your work, and this is the 2nd book in which you use post-colonial and Europe. So you must have been thinking more often about the word post-colonial and the word Europe. And probably you know this book as well, Postcolonial Transitions in Europe, in the same series. We use it in our work as well. Thank you very much for it. But I wondered, how do the two books relate to each other? So is the one book focusing on this happens in Europe, and is the other book focusing on, and this is how we think about it? Or is the one book, well, okay, I really would like, because I'm sure for you, you have taken another step. I would like to know more.
What I did not get, and I really tried to find it in the book, but what I did not get is whether those post-colonial thinkers who started this post-colonial discourse, I would say, whether for them Gramsci was the most important, and whether in that way, implicitly, you are saying it all started in Europe.
As from our standpoint with this book, we also want to make an intervention, on the anti-colonial side, which is of course not post-colonial, but then it has ties with post-colonial thinking and so on. And this is one of the chapters that refers mostly to, I don't know, poems even, like these Italian poems of the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, celebrating the pageants, but the national pageants, and so, and criticizing that. And just a way, it was also a way to, maybe we started with Europe, we also kind of displaced it to some extent.
To one's location. So not avoid the question of location, but are you going to base your politics on that question of location or not? And I think as a counterexample, you brought up, what was it, provincializing Europe. Right? Like a very depressing book for me. The one that, it was one of my inspiration. Chakravarti was a long-time inspiration until something happened. Why? What was the problem there? Was that here you have a post-colonial intellectual provincializing Europe with reference to specificities about Bengali culture. How does he theoretically justify that? Martin Heidegger. So maybe one should ask him that question, right? If you want to talk about this, that my ability to be specific, to provincialize Europe is to talk about my location. He gives a history of location, women, Bengal, Vyada, etc. But the theoretical justification of that is play Heidegger against Marx.